I showed up to my parents' $4.2K celebration dinner, which I paid for, and my brother toasted, "Guess even strays can pay sometimes." I got up, left, and 30 minutes later the bill hit their table. My phone blew up with 72 missed calls while I ate alone. I didn't even make it through dessert before walking out. They were still laughing when I stood up. The kind of fake, echoing laughter that sounds like clinking glass, hollow and sharp. It was supposed to be a celebration. My parents' 35th anniversary. I'd planned it for months, paid for everything. The total was $42.80 before tip, every plate, every bottle, every smile they faked that night. And then my brother raised his glass, smirked, and said, "Guess even Lee can pay sometimes." Everyone laughed. My dad even nodded like it was true. That was the moment something inside me just shut off. I picked up my coat, smiled, and said quietly, "Then you can pay for the rest." And I left. 30 minutes later, the manager called to say the refund had been processed. The bill was on their table. By the time I got home, I had 72 missed calls. You know what's worse than being unappreciated? Being invisible to the people who are supposed to love you most. Not strangers, not coworkers, family. It doesn't hit all at once. It eats at you like rust. Slowly, quietly, until you start believing you deserve the way they treat you. I used to think maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe my dad's constant criticism was just tough love. Maybe my mom's passive-aggressive digs about my job, my apartment, my single life were just concern. Maybe my brother's arrogance was just him joking. But that night, sitting at that long white tablecloth table, listening to my brother's voice echo while my parents laughed like I was some outsider they tolerated, it all snapped into focus. They never respected me, not once, not as a kid, not as an adult, not even when I literally paid for their celebration. And the worst part, I had a gift waiting for them after dinner, something I'd been saving for 5 months. I cut every corner, no new clothes, no takeout, no gym, just so I could give them something that might finally make them proud. I'd bought 2 matching watches, custom-made, sapphire and gold. The kind my mom once said she dreamed of owning when I was little. I had them engraved. For every second you gave me. They were sitting at home in their little blue boxes, waiting for the moment after dessert when I'd finally say, "Surprise." But there was no surprise left in me, only silence. I didn't answer the calls, didn't listen to the voicemails. I just sat by my apartment window watching the city lights blink, feeling the kind of calm that comes only after something inside you finally breaks for good. They didn't know it yet, but that night wasn't just the end of a dinner. It was the end of us. And if they thought that little dinner stunt was the worst thing I'd ever do to them, they hadn't seen anything yet. People always think family dysfunction looks loud, screaming matches, slamming doors, but mine was quiet. It was the kind that hides behind polite smiles and "we're just worried about you" texts. Growing up in Rochester, New York, I learned early that love in our house had conditions. My dad, Richard, was the kind of man who thought affection made you weak. My mom, Diane, specialized in guilt, her favorite hobby. And my brother, Caleb, could do no wrong. If Caleb failed a test, Dad said, "He's got potential." If I aced mine, Dad said, "Don't get cocky." It was like living in a play where everyone had a role, and mine was the disappointment. By the time I was 12, I'd already started pulling away. I stopped asking for rides, stopped showing them my grades, stopped expecting anyone to clap when I won something. The only person who ever did was my grandma, and when she passed, it felt like the last witness to who I really was had disappeared. College was my escape. I left for Chicago, worked 3 jobs, graduated without help from anyone. Meanwhile, Caleb coasted through 2 majors and 3 failed startups, all funded by my parents. When he moved back home at 29, they treated it like he'd returned from war. I came home for holidays, mostly out of obligation. Every visit felt like walking into a house museum where I was the only exhibit they didn't want. Mom would say things like, "You're so independent, Lee, almost too much." Dad would grumble, "You still renting. When are you going to settle down like your brother?" And Caleb, always smirking, would say, "Don't take it personal. You've always been the experimental child." Experimental. Like I was something they tried once and decided not to repeat. So when their anniversary came up, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could rewrite that story. Maybe if I gave them one night that felt like something out of a movie, they'd finally look at me and see more than the afterthought daughter. I made the reservations at an upscale restaurant near downtown, Marina's, one of those quiet places where the waiters whisper and the napkins feel like clouds. I even called ahead and had the chef recreate the meal my dad always bragged about from their honeymoon. I kept imagining their faces, Mom tearing up, Dad giving a rare nod of approval, Caleb speechless for once. Stupid, right? I wanted their love to look like a receipt, something I could finally prove I'd earned. That's why I didn't see it coming when Caleb turned it into a joke. Guess even Lee can pay sometimes. 8 words. That's all it took to erase months of work, years of effort, and a lifetime of trying to matter. But I didn't explode. I didn't make a scene. Because deep down, I realized something that hit harder than anger ever could. They didn't want to understand me. They liked me small, predictable, desperate to belong. That night when I left the restaurant, I told myself it was over. But the truth is, I didn't know just how deep their cruelty went. Or that Caleb's little joke wasn't random at all. He'd planned it. And when I found out why, everything I thought I knew about that family shattered. For a few days after the dinner, the silence was almost peaceful. No calls, no texts, no guilt-tripping voicemails, just quiet. But by Thursday, the storm hit. It started with my dad leaving a message that sounded like a performance. "You embarrassed us, Lee. You humiliated your mother. You humiliated this family." Then my mom called, voice trembling, not from sadness, but from that fake, fragile tone she used whenever she wanted to make me feel guilty. She said, "You really left us with that bill. Do you know how that looked?" Then Caleb chimed in, laughing through his voicemail. "Damn, sis, you really went nuclear over a joke. Chill out." I blocked them all. But they kept finding ways around it, emails, mutual friends, even my aunt messaging me saying I owed my parents an apology. Owed. That word started to rot in my head. By the next week, it was like a switch flipped. Instead of shame, I felt this sharp, simmering calm. I'd been the good daughter my entire life, obedient, careful, endlessly forgiving. Now I was just tired. I cleaned out my phone, deleted every photo with them in it. Every birthday video, every fake family Christmas. Gone. And for the first time, my apartment didn't feel small. It felt safe. But peace doesn't last when you're dealing with people who feed on control. On Sunday night, my mom sent a long email. No apology, just a list of grievances. She said Dad had to cover my bill, that everyone at the restaurant was staring, that I made them look cheap. And then at the bottom, like she couldn't help herself, she wrote, "We know you had something planned. Caleb said he saw a jewelry box when he was at your place. If it was meant for us, don't punish us by withholding it." I stared at that line for a long time. So Caleb had been snooping in my apartment. That explained too much. That's when the pieces started falling into place. A week before the dinner, Caleb had come by to borrow my laptop for a presentation. He'd left it open while I was in the kitchen, checking emails. At the time, I didn't think anything of it, but now I remembered. One of those emails was from the jeweler confirming delivery. He must have read it, and that meant when he made that toast, "Guess even Lee can pay sometimes," he knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't teasing me. He was exposing me. He wanted Mom and Dad to know how much I'd spent before I had the chance to tell them myself. Because in our family, generosity wasn't kindness, it was competition. And Caleb had made sure I lost before I could even play. That realization broke something clean inside me. All that time, I'd been trying to win love from people who treated it like currency. So I decided if money was all they understood, I'd use it against them. I wasn't going to scream or plead or explain. I was going to make them feel small the way they'd made me feel my entire life. And I had just the plan for it. I thought the worst thing they'd do was pretend nothing happened and wait me out. I was wrong. They didn't just ignore me. They weaponized everything I trusted against me. 3 days after I left the restaurant, I got an alert from my bank. Charge dispute initiated. At first I panicked. Did I forget I used my card somewhere? Then I opened the details and my stomach dropped. The dispute had been filed against my refund. Someone had called the bank and said the refund was fraud, that I'd tricked them into paying, that the charge should be returned to the original cardholder. The phone number attached to the dispute was my father's. Not a mistake, not a slip. My father, Richard, had called my bank and told them I'd lied, that I'd duped them into paying and that I was scamming the family. I replayed the voicemail he left in my head, the clipped calm, the practiced outrage. He knew banks would freeze transactions while they investigated. He knew exactly how much damage it would do. Humiliation at the restaurant, the manager caught between a card decline and a room full of awkward relatives, the entire scene collapsing back onto me. It hit harder than Caleb's toast ever did. This wasn't a drunken joke. This was premeditated. They hadn't simply laughed at me, they'd organized a public spectacle and then called the bank to make sure it stuck. I went to my emails and dug through everything. There was the jeweler's confirmation, delivered, signature pending. There was my payment receipt for the dinner, the reservation confirmation, the bank's automated reply about a temporary hold. There was also an odd message from the restaurant manager clarifying that the refund to my card had been reversed pending verification. Who does that to their own child? Then, in a fit of rationality that felt more like a dare, I called the bank. The rep was sympathetic until she read the dispute. "Mr. Richardson called," she said, like she was reciting a grocery list. "He alleges unauthorized charges and requested a hold. She told me it would take up to 5 business days to resolve. We've flagged it for fraud investigation," she said, and I could hear in her voice the bureaucratic absolution that would let my parents sleep at night. I sat on my kitchen floor and laughed because there was nothing else to do. Here I was paying for their dinner, spending months scraping by for a gift, and my father had the audacity to treat me like a criminal. It isn't just the money. It's the method. They used institutions, banks, rules, other people's courtesy to punish me for daring to be proud. They weaponized the systems I'd built my life on, my credit history, my steadiness, my trust. They called them to tell them I was a liar. And then there was the thing that made my chest ice, the jeweler's email history. Someone had opened the delivery confirmation on my laptop the week before, someone who'd borrowed it. Caleb. He admitted it later, hands in his pockets and voice small, saying he saw a package and didn't think it mattered. But it mattered. He'd known about the watches. He'd seen the amount. He'd known the plan. And when he toasted me in front of everyone, it wasn't a joke. It was a carefully placed knife. This wasn't sibling rivalry. It wasn't passive aggression. It was coordinated, efficient, and cruel. My mother's silence was no longer benign. She wasn't frozen. She was complicit. My father's voice on the bank record was the proof. I sat with the facts and they fit together too well. The dinner, the toast, the bank call, someone had rehearsed humiliation as if it were theater. They'd arranged for me to pay, to be exposed, and then used the bank to hold the scene in place until the apology that never came could be manufactured. I should have been furious. Instead, I felt something steadier, colder. The part of me that had spent 30 years shrinking to fit them now realized how long they'd been setting the rules of this game. They thought they could keep using the world as their weapon. But weapons only work if you let them. I closed my laptop, pulled the jeweler's order out of the drawer, and stared at the 2 dark blue boxes. For the first time, I saw those watches not as a plea for their approval, but as a ledger, months of my labor turned into currency that could be spent back on my terms. I had a plan before, petty and sharp. Now I had facts, receipts, and the knowledge that they believed institutions would do their dirty work for them. If they were going to use banks and secrets to humiliate me, then I could use the same rules to make them understand what it felt like to be stripped of dignity. I fed every quiet rage into a single cold decision. It would be precise, it would sting, and it would force them to look at what they'd done with clear eyes. But I still hadn't decided the first move. I didn't want revenge that looked like a tantrum. I wanted it to be surgical, cold, undeniable, and public enough that there was no place they could hide behind platitudes. No theatrics, no screaming. Just facts delivered in a way that made their story impossible to keep. First thing I did was gather everything. Receipts, emails, timestamps. The jeweler confirmation sat at the top of the pile, delivery pending, serial numbers, my engraving request. The restaurant confirmations showed the reservation times, the card used, the refund request. Then there was the bank notice about the temporary hold and the rep's terse line. "Mr. Richardson called to dispute." I printed every single page, stapled them together, made copies. Evidence isn't dramatic, it's boring. That's what made it lethal. Next, the money. The jeweler had taken the watches back earlier. I'd returned them because I wanted my leverage to be clean, liquid. The store had insisted they could resell them to a client who wanted a matching set. $1,200 more than the dinner refund landed back on my card. Enough. I moved it to a new account that only I would use for one thing. No charity, no impulse buys, just a fund for the plan. Then I did something people never expect. I treated this like a civil case without the lawyer. If you want people to change their minds, you don't yell, you create witnesses. So I built witnesses. I emailed the restaurant manager, politely, and asked for a written statement about what happened the night of the dinner, the refund, the hold, the way the staff handled the situation. The manager replied within a day, apologetic and thorough. He attached the log showing the card hold, and the moment he was told the charge was under review. That was the first official voice outside our family that placed responsibility on them, not me. I also collected the screenshots and voicemails. They were messy, but they were mine. I transcribed the voicemail where Dad's voice slipped into that thin cruelty, the sentence that had destroyed the part of me that still sought approval. I had no intention of being vindictive with personal humiliation, but the truth mattered. If he'd spoken like that, people needed to know the kind of person he was when there were no witnesses. With everything in a neat PDF, I made a list of recipients. Not random people, strategic ones. The wedding photographer who'd known us for years. My childhood pastor who'd counseled our family. My aunt who'd been a quiet ally. A couple of mutual friends who'd once laughed when Caleb made digs and said nothing. I also included a professional contact of my dad's, his partner at the firm, because Richard always projected respectability like a shield. If the shield cracked, the rest would follow. I wrote a single cover note, short, factual, and impossible to misinterpret. I attached the manager's statement, the bank notice, the jeweler confirmation, the transcribed voicemail, and a timeline, dates, times, who said what. No flourish, no exclamation points. Just the file, titled for your records, a timeline of events. I sent it to the list at midnight, scheduled so messages would hit inboxes in the morning when people read emails like they were gospel. Then I did one more thing, because I wanted them to feel the mechanics of their own move. I called the bank again, asked for a formal incident report referencing Mr. Richardson's dispute, and requested a case number. The representative sent a short PDF confirming the complaint and the temporary hold. That document went into the package too. I didn't expect immediate fireworks. People don't always react right away. But I wanted the record. I wanted witnesses who could no longer pretend the truth was different. I wanted the veneer of respectability to crack. When I hit send, my hands were steady. For the first time since that toast, my pulse didn't spike. I had not screamed. I had not begged. I had not allowed their cruelty to redefine me. What I didn't know was that whatever I'd set in motion would not only expose their cruelty, it would force them to choose between protecting their reputation and protecting each other. And that choice would reveal a secret none of us expected. I expected fallout, angry calls, maybe a public meltdown. What I didn't expect was silence. 3 days passed, then a week. Nothing. No calls, no emails, no shouting. Just a strange, watchful quiet. I told myself that meant the plan had worked, that they were embarrassed, that maybe my dad's precious reputation had taken a hit. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the end of it. People like my father don't accept humiliation. They rewrite it. It started subtly. My aunt stopped replying to texts. A coworker of my dad's, one of the people I'd sent the email to, suddenly unfollowed me on social media. A mutual friend posted something cryptic. Sometimes family lies are louder than the truth. And then on Thursday night, around 9:30, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Caleb was standing there, same lazy confidence, but his eyes looked different this time. Nervous. He was holding a grocery bag and a small white envelope. "I didn't come to fight," he said quietly. I didn't let him in at first, but then he held out the bag. Takeout from the diner, the one we used to go to as kids. Same greasy burgers, same fries that came in wax paper. Nostalgia wrapped in paper and guilt. He said Mom and Dad were shaken after what I'd done. That they felt exposed. That Dad's business partner had called him, asking questions. He said Dad was furious but trying to fix things. Then Caleb said something that made my throat go dry. "Dad's not the one who called the bank, Lee. It was Mom." I stared at him. "What are you talking about? The report literally says—" "I know. She used Dad's name," he said. His account, his voice notes from his work calls. "She practiced it. She thought it'd sound more believable if the bank thought it was him. The air felt heavy, unreal. He kept talking. She told me the night after the dinner. Said she had to make sure you'd learned your lesson. She didn't want you to think you could embarrass them and just walk away. I couldn't speak. It was too twisted, too deliberate. My mother, the one who cried about being embarrassed, had staged the whole thing to look like Dad's doing. And if that was true, then every single thing since the dinner, the silence, the guilt, even Caleb's visit wasn't random. It was strategy, but Caleb wasn't finished. "She's scared now," he said. "The email you sent got to Dad's firm. They're talking about it. Someone called HR. They might open an ethics review because the bank complaint was made from his line." My mother had used his name, and now his career was on the line. Caleb looked down, rubbing his thumb along the edge of the envelope. "Mom's been begging me to get you to take the emails back, say it was a misunderstanding." Inside the envelope was a check. $4,216. The exact cost of the dinner. She said if you cash it, we're square. It wasn't repayment. It was hush money. I laughed, sharp and humorless. "And if I don't?" He hesitated. "Then she's going to tell people you're unstable, that you've been—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. I already knew what he meant. The same old story, the emotional daughter, the ungrateful child, the problem. But what Caleb didn't realize was that I'd stopped caring about their version of the story. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Tell her to go ahead." He just stood there, speechless, while I closed the door. The next morning, the truth exploded online, not because of me, but because someone at my dad's firm leaked the internal email thread. The ethics review was real. The fake voice recording, the bank dispute, the lies, all of it. And suddenly, everyone knew. But that wasn't the part that stunned me. The part that made me sit down and shake was what came next. Because when the firm questioned my father about the complaint, he didn't deny it. He didn't defend my mother. He said one sentence that changed everything. "That wasn't Diane's idea, it was Lee's." He'd thrown me under the bus to save himself, and the story was about to get darker than I ever thought possible. When the news hit that my father had blamed me, I didn't get angry right away. I got quiet. The kind of quiet that only comes when something inside you finally stops trying to make sense of the madness. The firm suspended him pending investigation. My mom, apparently, had a breakdown over it, or at least that's what Caleb said when he called 2 days later, sounding like he hadn't slept. He said Dad told them you hacked his account, that you used his credentials to file the false dispute. I laughed. "He really said that?" "Yeah," Caleb said softly, "and Mom's backing him up." I hung up before he could keep talking. Because it wasn't confusion I was feeling anymore, it was realization. This wasn't panic. It was a cover-up. And that meant only one thing: there was something bigger underneath it all. Something they were protecting. I started piecing things together the only way I knew how, by following the paper trail. The dinner, the charge, the refund, the call to the bank. My dad's firm. When the firm launched their internal audit, one of his coworkers, the one I'd emailed the documents to, reached out privately. Her name was Sheila. She said she couldn't give details, but that the bank complaint my mother had filed hadn't just used my dad's name. It had used his company's corporate account. I felt my stomach drop. That meant my father hadn't just been covering for her. He'd been covering for himself. He'd authorized those accounts for family use. But what the audit found was years of misuse, vacations, electronics, personal dinners, all billed through the firm and marked as client relations. The dinner refund had triggered a review of his transactions, and when the investigators saw my name tied to a reverse charge, it opened every door he'd been trying to keep locked. They didn't care about the family drama. They cared about the money. Tens of thousands of dollars worth of false claims. And now it made sense why he blamed me. If he could convince the firm I'd accessed his card or filed something on his behalf, he could bury the entire pattern under one convenient lie. But there was something even sicker under that. When I went back through my own bank statements, I noticed small deposits, $200 here, $300 there, over the last few years. They weren't from any name I recognized, until I checked one closely. It was from Caleb's old LLC. That's when it clicked. Dad had been using my account as a pass-through. Small, untraceable transfers from his business expenses, moving them through mine to hide the trail. And my brother had been helping him. The toast at dinner hadn't been a slip. It was his way of mocking the fact that I'd been his father's financial decoy for years without even knowing it. Every random deposit had been a breadcrumb to keep the books balanced. Every time Dad criticized my spending, he was hiding behind it. And Mom, she'd known. She'd stayed silent because the money kept their world looking perfect: the house, the cars, the country club dues. Her whole identity depended on that illusion. So when I walked out of that dinner, I hadn't just embarrassed them. I'd cracked the facade, and the entire lie they'd been living started to unravel. Now the bank was investigating fraud, the firm was digging into misuse, and my name, the one they'd tried to ruin, was on every report as the trigger. It should have scared me. It didn't. Because for once, they were exactly where they'd spent years putting me: exposed, desperate, and out of control. But I wasn't finished yet. If they wanted to drag my name through the mud to save themselves, I was going to make sure the truth came out in a way that no one could ever rewrite again. When you grow up with people like that, revenge stops feeling like payback. It feels like justice. And justice, I learned, doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be permanent. The moment I realized my father had been funneling money through my account, I didn't run to confront him. I went to someone who would actually listen: the compliance officer at his firm. Sheila had already hinted that something wasn't right, so when I emailed her the transfer receipts, the timestamps, and the exact routing numbers, she called me within an hour. "I can't promise anything," she said, "but this looks bad for him." I didn't want promises. I wanted facts. Within a week, an internal review turned into a full-blown audit. Within 2, my father was asked to take an indefinite leave. By the 3rd, the firm froze his corporate accounts entirely. The irony: the dinner charge, the one they'd tried to hang me with, was listed in the audit summary as the incident that initiated discovery. My revenge was literally in the paperwork. Mom called, of course. She left me voicemails in her calm, rehearsed tone. "Lee, this is getting out of hand. You're ruining your father's career over a misunderstanding." Then, when that didn't work, another one. "You've always been jealous of your brother. Don't pretend this isn't about that." She didn't get it. It was never about jealousy. It was about truth. The final blow came on a Monday morning in March. I woke up to an email from an address I didn't recognize. It was from HR at my dad's firm. A courtesy notification. They'd completed their investigation. The report attached had everything: unauthorized reimbursements, fraudulent expenses, evidence of falsified signatures, and one detail that made my hands shake: several payments traced back to my mother's account, too. They were both in it together. By Friday, both my parents' social media profiles were gone. The firm quietly removed my father's name from the website, and when Caleb finally texted, it was short and bitter. "You got what you wanted. Hope you're happy." I didn't respond, because happiness wasn't the point. Peace was. A month later, I got a letter from the bank confirming that my record had been cleared. The fraudulent dispute was reversed, the investigation closed. My name was clean. I thought I'd feel relief, but it was quieter than that. Like the world had finally stopped spinning off balance. That night, I walked to the riverfront where the city lights hit the water. I opened my purse and took out the gold heart keychain Caleb had given me the night he showed up, the one that said, "Forgive me when you can." I turned it over once, twice, then dropped it into the dark water and watched it disappear. They'd called me selfish, dramatic, said I'd walked away from the family. But the truth was simpler: I'd stopped being their scapegoat. I got a new phone number, moved apartments, started saving again, not out of fear this time, but out of habit. A clean slate. A few months later, a package showed up at my door: no return address. Inside was one of the sapphire watches I'd returned, engraving still there: "For every second you gave me." Except this time, someone had scratched another word into the metal underneath it. Taken. I didn't even flinch. I just smiled, because it was perfect. They finally understood time was the only thing they couldn't steal back from me. So I slipped the watch on my wrist, looked out at the city, and whispered to no one, "Guess even strays learn to bite." And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt free.